Hi, Tim. It's Liz Braden. Michelle. Michelle Dumont. I got a number for her.
Hi, everyone. We were just making sure that we were coordinating on YouTube, and we will be starting that soon. But it looks like we have a good amount of folks we've just let in. And so I want to make sure that we're all working together. So there's a slight, just one more bit of a delay, but I'm admitting folks, and we'll get started probably in literally the next minute.
Liz, you may want to mute.
I'm not muted. No. Oops, thank you for letting me know. Maybe eavesdropping and all sorts of stuff in this.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to do I'll gavel in, water bottle in, and then do a quick introduction. And I see just for my records, Counselor Flynn, I think I had Counselor Bach actually first, then Counselor Braden, and then Counselor Flynn. I'm sorry, Counselor Janey, then Counselor Flynn. Sorry, Counselor Flynn. You're usually in the top 2 or 3, but I'm just right. And then Counselor Flynn, and then I have, I think that is it for the city councilors. If I'm missing anyone, please say so now. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Counselor Lydia Edwards. I am the chair of the Housing and Community Development Committee. We are here today for today's hearing on several dockets. I'm going to first explain why we're doing it via Zoom, and then I will summarize those dockets and the numbers. These matters, all of the matters were sponsored by Martin J. Walsh, our mayor, with regards to funding. But in accordance with Governor Baker's executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, we are conducting this hearing today on via Zoom. That is also being this meeting is also being watched live at www.boston.gov/city-council-TV. It also will be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email and will be made a part of the record, available to all counselors. Also, folks who are here to speak on behalf of the public or any concerns, we will go through, we will have the presentation from the administration. We'll go straight to questioning from the counselors for any concerns, and then have the administration address those, and then we will open up for public comment. Today, we're discussing several matters, and I want to make sure I got the summary of them. Normally, I read them in the title of each one, and I will do my best to just summarize. We're discussing docket 0628. This is a message in order authorizing City of Boston to accept $17,437,636 in the form of a grant from the CDBG. Docket 0929, another order authorizing the City of Boston to accept $10,257,948 in the form of a grant from CDBG 20 CARES awarded by the U.S. Department, and this is specifically for the economic crisis conditions caused by COVID. Docket 0360, message and order authorizing to accept $5,871,574 in the form of a grant. This is for housing and neighborhood development. Docket 0631, message and order to expend and to accept $5,195,210. This is a form of emergency solutions grant of COVID-19. This is awarded to the Department of Neighborhood Development. Docket 0632, also authorizing us to accept $3,089,000 in the form of a grant for persons with AIDS. 06, or housing people with AIDS. 0634, again, another grant authorizing the City of Boston to accept $1,500,000 in the form of emergency solutions grant. And 0635, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $400,000 for COVID response, and the grant would be funding the housing for persons with AIDS. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to the administration. We have Trin Nguyen from the Office of Workforce Development. Am I correct?
Yes, Counselor.
And we have Tim Davis from the Department of Neighborhood Development. And we
correct.
Rick Wilson also. Are you here, Rick?
I'm here.
Wave. Okay. On behalf of the Department of Neighborhood Development, and we've been also joined by Councillor Flaherty. I just see that you're in, Councillor Flaherty. Am I missing anyone from the administration?
No.
Okay, so I will turn it over to Tim, Trin, and Rick to take it away.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. For the record, I am Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research at the Department of Neighborhood Development. Joining me today are Trin Nguyen, Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and Rick Wilson, Deputy Director for Administration and Finance in the Department of Neighborhood Development. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and for the other councillors here today for being here. I'd also like to begin by thanking Councillor Edwards for scheduling this hearing expeditiously. 4 of the orders before us authorize D&D on behalf of the city to apply for, accept, and expend the federal fiscal year 2020 funding for our HUD formula grants. The federal fiscal year 2020 is the City of Boston year 21, fiscal year 21. In addition, the remaining 3 orders before us authorize D&D on behalf of the city to apply for and accept and expend HUD funds from the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security CARES Act was passed on March 27th. These important funds
Tim, for at least on my end, I had you broke up. I don't know, was that on anyone else's end or was he fine? Other ends, okay. So you were finishing up describing the, you were starting into the coronavirus specific aids,
okay.
or excuse me, acts. So if you could just start there again.
In addition, the remaining 3 orders before us authorize D&D on behalf of the city to apply for, accept, and expend HUD funds from the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, that was passed on March 27th. These important funds allow D&D to continue to carry out a wide range of housing and community development programs across every neighborhood of the city of Boston, while also addressing some of the urgent needs created because of the COVID-19 emergency. I will speak briefly about our annual allocations for the city's 2021 fiscal year, which begins on July 1st, providing highlights from the fact sheets that were given out to the City Council. Boston will receive about $27.9 million from HUD for these annual allocations. This is about $1 million more than last year's total of $26.8 million from 4 sources. The Community Development Block Grant funds, which we increased 1.7% increased funding over last year. The Home Investment Partnerships Program, which has a 10% increase over last year's funding. The Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, or HOPWA funds, which increased 6.7% over last year. And the Emergency Solutions Grants, or ESG, which is 3.1% greater than last year. ESG specifically relates to helping people who have experienced homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. Prior to putting together our federal spending plan each year, our action plan must have a public meeting be held to gather input on how best to spend our federal resources. This meeting was held on March 11th. Our next step is to issue a draft plan and host a second virtual citywide public meeting to get feedback on the draft plan. Normally, we would have provided this draft plan during April. However, the CARES Act does allow us to postpone this action into 2021, but we are planning to provide the action plan in the next month. For FY21, our CDBG, Home, HOPWA, and ESG funds will be primarily used to continue very effective resident programs for the residents of Boston. About 64% of the HUD's funds support 14 housing and homelessness programs, including the development of affordable housing, assistance to low and moderate income home buyers and homeowners, rental support for persons living with HIV and AIDS, and support for renters at risk of displacement. CDBG funds also support our economic development, public service, and property management programs, including the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, which will receive close to $2.7 million for public service activities and job readiness programs. Trin Nguyen will speak about these programs in just a moment. And the Office of Economic Development, which will receive about $4 million to continue their work supporting Main Street districts and small businesses. For the HOPWA Fund, the city will receive $3.1 million in funding, and the use of this will be decided once there's an increase of 6.7% in funding. The increase funds will be decided once proposals are received from our partner agencies. ESG, the city will receive $1.5 million for ESG. This is a slight increase over last year. Approximately half of the funds go to homelessness prevention and the other half to street outreach. Next, I will speak briefly about the CARES Act funding. The CARES Act, passed on March 27, made direct allocations to the city of Boston through free grant.
Hi, Tim. Same thing. I don't know, it just knows when we're just getting so excited and about to grab popcorn. So if you could start again from the CARES Act specific.
A phone connection, so it should be better, but I know that the system may not pick me up. The CARES Act funding. The CARES Act funding made direct allocations to the city of Boston through three programs: CDBG, HOPWA, and ESG, totaling $15,902,720. And these funds are to be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus pandemic. The $10.2 million in CDBG funds can be used for a range of eligible activities that prioritize the needs of low and moderate income persons serving households with incomes under 80% of the Boston metropolitan area median family income, or in a geographic area where at least 51% of the households have incomes under that threshold. We are looking at focusing these funds on two efforts: the Rental Relief Fund and the Small Business Relief Fund. While both received with city funds, we are hoping to add funds to these programs. The $5.2 million in emergency shelter grant funds will be spent on facilities and services needed to support those who have been experiencing homelessness during this crisis. Our service partners have already expended thousands and perhaps millions of dollars in this effort. We will be making these funds available through an application process. Through this process, we will be able to determine what needs can be paid for by other sources, such as FEMA, and what will need to be paid for by ESG. ESG funding will prioritize enhanced staffing for existing shelter operations and auxiliary sites created in response to COVID-19, hazard and retention pay for staff on the front lines of this crisis, cleaning supplies and janitorial services, food, room dividers, and other apparatus necessary to modify existing shelter spaces to better support social distancing, PPE for staff and clients, hotel rooms if needed as a result of the crisis that cannot be obtained in any other way, and case management. Finally, the $450,000 in funding for HOPWA will be a similar application process. There is a smaller pool of agencies involved in this area, most of which we already have existing relationships with, but that will again be mostly used to help HOPWA assisted households remain in their homes through short mental and utility. There could be other use of these funds similar to what is being used for ESG in terms of helping to provide cleaning services, social distancing, etc. I now turn to Trin Nguyen, Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, to speak briefly about her work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Edwards, and thank you, Vice Chair Bach, attending council members, and community participants. For the record, my name is Trin Nguyen, and I am the Director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, also known as OWD. My speaking references is for docket number 0628 as it references the Community Development Block Grants. I want to first thank Chief Sheila Dillon, D&D and their staff for their tremendous effort in supporting workforce training and education for residents within the community development block grants. I also want to thank our staff and their hard work on managing these large, complex grants. As the city's workforce development agency, OWD manages a portion of CDBG funds on behalf of D&D, which receives CDBG funds for Boston from the federal government. Last spring, we issued 2 open and competitive requests for proposals, soliciting programs to use CDBG funds to promote economic mobility for Boston residents. The 2 RFPs received a total of 68 responses, requesting $3.9 million in funding requests, way above what we could provide. However, for FY20, OWD recommended funding 51 organizations for a total of $2,268,500 to provide critical employment, education, and economic services to over 4,000 low-income residents with a range of services including job training and readiness, education, youth program, English as a second language, and benefit screening. Funding also included $400,000 for adult basic education programs. These programs allow us to fill in the gaps left by the state's adult basic education funding, and we prioritize programs that offer contextualized, job-specific ESOL with pathways into employment for low-income Boston residents. To continue the city's commitment to equitable economic development, our grant-making principles this year were largely the same as the previous year, requiring partners to build programs leading to either employment, job training, or post-secondary education and economic security for residents. Building on this continuum of activities and services, funded programs also emphasize targeting industries with career pathways in family-sustaining jobs and developing contextualized education and occupation, specific training and credentialing that further heightens the connection between CDBG and employment career pathways. We also supported programs that address underemployment incumbent workers to give them higher skills and career opportunity based on these skills. FY21 is the second year of 2-year funding cycle, limited to programs funded by FY20, with refunding contingent upon availability of federal funds, satisfactory program performance outcomes, and responsive refunding application. With the continued funding for FY21, a refunding application document was issued on March the 20th, 2020, with responses due Friday, May the 1st. Historically, the vast majority of funded programs have both performed well enough and submitted responsive refunding applications to be level funded for a second consecutive year. Rarely do we have programs choose not to reapply or fail to acceptably perform. Normally, each application is carefully reviewed, performance is evaluated throughout the year, and other factors such as administrative responsiveness are taken into consideration. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this year's refunding process is anything but normal. All programs have been impacted, completely shutting down to transition to some kind of distance learning, telework, or electronic service delivery. With welcome guidance from HUD, we are working with all programs to ensure they receive all of their FY20 funding. No program will be penalized for failing to meet performance goals negotiated last summer, and we are able to pay programs through the end of the fiscal year regardless. Programs are also allowed to amend their contracts provided certain services specific to mitigating the impact of the pandemic. A phone conference with all current awardees was held on April the 20th, 2020, and a detailed Q&A was prepared. A copy of these documentations, along with the refunding application and the list of FY20 awardees, are available upon request. I'm happy to answer questions that you may have. Thank you for your time and your support.
That completes our presentation. So any questions, we're happy to take those now.
Okay. Did Rick have anything, or we're all set? We're going to go to questions? Okay.
That's correct. Rick is here as our kind of budget support. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to separate, because there's 2 buckets of funding, and I know a lot of folks are interested very likely in the newest forms under the CARES Act. So I think we can move relatively quickly through what I think are the non-controversial fundings that we normally get. That would be dockets 628, 0628, 0630, and 0632. So I want folks in this question, I'm referring, this is mostly for my colleagues. This is money, again, that we normally get for the city of Boston. These are funds, and I will repeat what they are. I just did the docket numbers, and I'd like the questioning from the advocates from the city council to be about this regular funds first, and then we will go to the COVID money. Again, the numbers are 628, which is about $17 million. That's for a CDBG grant. That is what Trin Nguyen is going to be speaking about, specifically the money going to Office of Workforce Development. That is a docket number 630. That is for, oh, excuse me. Yep. Yes. That is for, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but that is for $5 million in the form of a grant for the home investment partnerships that'll go to DND. And then docket number 632, which is $3 million for housing for persons with AIDS. Did I get all of the specific regular money coming into the city?
There
ahead,
is
Tim.
also docket 630634, which is the
Yeah.
1.5 million for emergency shelter grants. And on the CDBG grant, yes, Trends Agency is one of the recipients, but DND is also a recipient of those funds.
Is also a recipient. Okay, so we heard those funds and we heard those grants, and these are regular monies that we have applied for and have gotten on a regular basis. I think in the fact sheet, you could see that we've been getting CDBG money since the 70s. So to my colleagues, I'm going to now turn it over to an order of arrival, those folks to discuss again the monies that we regularly get. And then we will go into the particulars about the new monies and any questions on that. And I'm going to be pretty strict in time, especially with what I think are non-controversial funds that we've regularly gotten before and have approved as a body. So in order of arrival, I believe Vice Chair Kenzie Bach, then Councillor Braden, then Councillor Jamie. Councillor Bach. And I'm going to move faster than 5 minutes, guys. Sorry. I think for the non-controversial stuff, we're going to get through that. So, okay, go ahead, Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and thank you all for being before us today. Obviously, I think this is really important money for the city on all fronts, and has been so, as the chair said, for many years. I guess my questions both to on the OWD and the D&D side would just be, it seemed from, well, on the D&D side, Tim, it certainly seemed from your presentation like we're mostly expecting this to kind of go in the same directions it has traditionally gone in. But just wondering, when you spoke to sort of what the percent increases were over last year, how much of the sort of additional money is just going to go to kind of normal cost inflations, or is there any new money in this regular money for us to do something different or expand something with?
At this, I think Rick looks like he wants to answer it.
Sure.
Rick, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, councilors. This is again Rick Wilson. I'm the Deputy Director for Administration and Finance at D&D. On the CDBG side, it's a pretty small increase at 1.7%. It's about $200,000, and we do fund staff out of our CDBG grants, and obviously staff costs go up every year. So that's not going to really feel like too much of an increase. So that's kind of going to, it's essentially level funding on the CDBG side. I think the one notable increase is in the home investment partnership program. We use that funding to support the development of affordable housing. So it is nice to get that additional funding that we can fund more projects, more affordable housing projects in the coming years. So I think that's probably the only thing that's worth noting as far as the increased funding goes.
Great, thank you. And on the OWD side, how much of this trend would you expect to be just sort of going in the same directions as it always has, versus is there any increase in some direction?
Yeah, so this year, as Rick has mentioned, we are level funded for last year. And usually when we have our community development grant RFP for workforce and education and adult basic education, It's a 2-year funding. We do that so that because it's administratively burdensome for a lot of grantees, we try to make it a 2-year grant contingent upon eligibility, staff outcomes, and performance that were agreed to, and contingent upon funding. And so this is the second year of the 2-year commitment. What we're doing is, refunding at level funding the programs that we funded last year. And so we also have a list of that for you, and we can submit that for you after.
Yeah, that would be great to get, just because I think obviously, and I won't go in this direction because I know the chair wants us to have the COVID conversations in the next round, but I think obviously with workforce development, I mean, the question of how we're going to support even our ongoing funding program to totally reposition what they're doing seems like a big open question.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
So I'd love that list. Thank you so much. And I'll yield my time back to the chair.
Councillor Braden?
I just got a quick question about adult basic education with regard to English language skills. With talking to the local coalition of adult education here in the neighbourhood, they find that it's really difficult to get funding for the very basic first level of English language, because so much of your metrics are looking at job placement. But for folks who don't speak any little or no English, there's no sort of level of funding that will help them get on the first rung of the ladder, so to speak. Is there any plans to do a pilot or anything that would address those issues?
Yes, that's a great question, Councillor, and thank you for bringing that up. So first, in terms of standardized metrics for ESOL 1, which you're referring to, actually the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, called DESE, they fund a chunk of that in Boston for ESL 1. What you might be referring to is prior to the DESE standard ESL 1, whether or not there's a lot of funding for it. And unfortunately, there's also a lot of needs. So what we did was set aside $400,000 from the Community Development Block Grant to fund that gap that the state has not funded. And we also took funding from unrestricted funds from the city and from our office to fund that. Clearly, there is a need to do more, and we'd love to do more if we had additional resources.
Very good, thank you. I wish you had additional resources also. Thank you so much.
Of course.
That's all for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Braden. We have Councillor Janey, Councillor Flynn, and then Councillor Flaherty, and we'll be finishing the first round on the regular funds. Councillor Janey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. No questions this round.
Thank you very much. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I just want to say thank you to the dedicated city employees that are here with us today for your work on not only on these grants, but working hard every day, advocating for residents in need. So I have no questions. I just wanted to say thank you to our city employees.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flynn. And I will just echo your thanks and gratitude. We understand in many cases you have a lot on your plates right now, but to acknowledge what Tim had said earlier, that was the point of getting all this done in one hearing as soon as possible. Normally these grants are spread out throughout the year, but we figured the best thing we could do is talk about the resources and getting them to your departments as soon as possible. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted the opportunity to thank obviously the administration officials, Tim Davis, Trin, and Rick for being on the call this afternoon, and go on record as supporting all 7 dockets. I know we're sort of taking some now and later. I got to jump on a 2:45 Zoom call with one of our community health centers. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the great work that comes as a result of CDBG. I challenge anyone to say those 4 fast, but our CDBG funds are critical for our city. and I've always been a proud supporter as a member of the council supporting them. So just a quick number run. I think there's about $48 million of very much needed funds that nice shot in the arm, given that we're dealing with the COVID-19 response, but for rental assistance for our homeless, for those living with AIDS, et cetera. So you guys do it probably better than anybody. Tim, I know we go back a lot of years and you've been on the front lines of all of this stuff. So happy to be a proud supporter, happy to support the chair's committee report, and look forward to continuing working together as we deal with all these issues and the after effects of COVID-19, when we can finally look in the rearview mirror at it. But the impacts around housing and homelessness and rental assistance are going to continue to be issues that we're going to be dealing with together as a city for many more months and years to come. So thank you for your time and attention. Unfortunately, I got to jump off, but I want to go on record of supporting the chair and all 7 of these dockets.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
great afternoon and enjoy your weekend. God bless.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. So just to let some folks know, in terms of just the technical note, I understand due to security, we are trying to have folks kind of tell us who they are when they come in and are admitted into the waiting room. So we really are asking you to put your name, or at least something that we could identify who you are. And so if we don't get that, some folks are not being admitted because we're not really sure who they are. But everyone can see this publicly. We're not in terms of denying access to see what we're doing and denying access to the conversation. Everyone can still submit public comments and concerns. But in terms of admitted into the Zoom, that's what I wanted to say. I know that there's one person in the waiting room. We're just asking, I think, for that person to say who they are to be in the Zoom. But they can absolutely participate and submit any comments, call to our offices and see what's going on. So now we're going to go to the, I didn't have any questions personally as a chair for those funding grants. So now we're going to go to 3 dockets, 0291 CDBG funds for approximately $10 million for COVID response. Docket 0631, which is emergency ESG grants. I actually know them by the letters more than the formal name. That grant is for approximately $5 million, again, for COVID response. And then 0635, which is an additional $450,000 for housing people with AIDS, again, in the COVID crisis. As spoken very briefly before by Tim and Trin, the CDBG $10 million is looking to go towards the rent relief and small business relief funds that we have. And you can again add in or correct me if I'm being incorrect or need to add some more substance. The ESG funds is looking at the homelessness response, and that would be for, I assume, folks to apply for that funding who are already in the service of sheltering homeless individuals. And they will also be vetted for other funds that they may be able to get. They probably can't get both FEMA and this money. And then finally, the HOPRA, which is, again, an application process for nonprofits or servicing agencies that are already doing this work who will apply for the additional funding. Did I summarize it essentially what we're talking about correctly? Thumbs up from the administration? Yes. Okay. Is Trin still with us, or did she have to go?
Trin is here.
Okay, excellent. All right then. So I'm going to reserve my questions for anything afterwards, but I'm going to go ahead and again, in order of arrival. I don't believe I have any additional city councilors joining us today, and if I do, I apologize. I have not recognized you. I don't see. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Councilor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tim, I was wondering if you could just again recap. So the COVID money that's coming in, we're expecting what proportion of that to go into the rental relief fund?
It's still yet to be determined. We are looking at the initial results from the first lottery to see how much additional funding we will want to put into that program. But again, it would probably be a substantial proportion of it.
Mm-hmm. And what are the other major buckets that we would expect to put the housing piece of this into?
That's the major bucket at this point, is in terms of housing, would be into the rental relief fund. We are monitoring and working with our partners in other cities to see what they are thinking about doing with these funds as well. We are also watching to see what happens in Washington. There is some discussion that an additional COVID relief bill may be in the works that would include some direct rental relief funds. And we're also, of course, working with the state. So we're not putting a dollar amount on it today, just because we want to kind of get a sense of what other resources are going to be out there. It's clear that the resource is needed because in the first round of the lottery, we had approximately 5,500 applicants who got passed, who were Boston residents who applied. And so we'll certainly be looking at ways that we can support more households.
And am I right that we ended up, was it about 700 households we think we're going to be able to help in the first round?
That's what we're thinking. Now that's based on each household can get up to $4,000, which represents approximately 3 months of rental support. It's possible that some households won't need that much funding, which would mean we could serve more households.
And we still don't have the data on, because obviously the 5,500, that's a pretty rough cut because it's just everybody who had a Boston address.
Correct.
We still don't have, I know like council's expecting at some point to hear kind of, once you applied the income screen, like question what's your nonprofit partners did, right? How many, because to me, it matters a lot to understand, are we serving, say it stays at 700, are we serving 700 out of 3,000 people who would have qualified for the parameters that DND drew, or is it actually, 1,400 or what, but are we there yet on knowing that?
Before you answer, Tim,
yes.
very quickly, and just for for my colleagues, we are having a working session specifically on the rental relief program. So I'm happy to have him answer these questions, and we'll go through it into another conversation. But for folks who are hearing these and getting more questions about the rental relief specifically and its administration, which we do have a lot of questions about, I wanted people to know there will be a working session on that. All fair questions, Councilor Bach. I just wanted to inform people. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. And yes, we'll be happy to be there for May the 4th. We will, hopefully by May the 4th, we'll start to have some of those numbers. It is dependent upon the agencies actually being able to process applications and start to give us at least a hint of, they had the first 100 applications. There were 10% weren't eligible, those kinds of things going forward. But also it'll help us to know how many households we'll be able to serve based on some of that, those applications as well.
Great, that all makes sense. Awesome. And I guess then that's all for D&D. And then for Trin, I guess if I could just ask how you're thinking about using this money on the OWD side.
I think we're still in conversations internally about, given the huge need between housing and small businesses, we're still we're still having a conversation on the employment piece. Clearly, the labor market will shift. Huge job losses. We don't know what's coming back if there are. And skills will be needed and some won't. And so that's still being worked out. But as soon as we we come to concrete strategies, we will definitely circle back and let you know.
Okay. All right. I see. So still, yeah. Well, none of us quite know exactly what we're heading into. I mean, there's some, right. You have some sense that certainly training people up on virtual things would be useful at this juncture. As we've all learned on the council to use Zoom in the last few weeks.
Absolutely.
But really, really appreciate your work. And those are all my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor
Bach. Let's see, Councilor Braden.
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you for running a really tight hearing. I think my questions were answered from the previous speaker, and want to say thank you to the administration. I certainly fully support these grants, and I think it's important to move it quickly so that we can help those in most need. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and thank you to Tim and to Trin as well. I just wanted to highlight, as it relates to constituents that I have and that I've talked with, I have a lot of residents, Asian residents that work in restaurants. They don't make much money. They're struggling to pay rent. Oftentimes they work very hard, sometimes outside of the city. So some of the paperwork is not there right now, as a lot of these restaurants are closed. But I want to make sure that we also understand the Asian community, making sure that they're part of this process as it relates to job training, as it relates to workforce development, but also paying bills as well. So what are we doing for hard to reach residents of our city, such as the Chinese community that might work in restaurants that may or may not be documented? What are we doing to help them?
So the rental relief fund is intended to help people who may be undocumented or work in jobs where it's mostly a cash business, even if they're, regular citizens. So those funds are meant to help those households. I think that we will have discussions as part of the May 4th working session on what can be some methods that we can better reach those communities that may not get information as easily as you're able to give to your neighbor. So I think those are some things that we'll be working on for that working session. Is what are some better methods to reach those folks?
Thank you. And I think that's a great point, Councillor, and I'm glad you raised it. We have been working diligently to not only level fund the agencies that are great partners that have direct connections to the constituents that you're talking about, but we also have been working with the Boston Resilient Fund to try to get some of those dollars out to non-traditional funding agencies, and making sure that those who were laid off immediately and or have unconventional job pathways to get them to work right away. We're also working with SEIU 1199 and Best Corn Local 26 Training Fund to see what we can leverage and match so that those who are out of work and staying home, we are providing free Chromebooks and also extra certifications online so that while they're staying home and out of work, they can get additional training so that once we bounce back, they can apply for the jobs that they lost. Now, clearly our focus right now is reemployment. We're really keeping an eye on the labor market trends, huge job losses, what's coming back and what's not. And the key is to get Boston residents jobs as soon as we come back. So we're trying hard to look at different flexible funds, working with private funders and corporate foundations to see what they can fund that they don't usually fund. So we're definitely on it, and thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you, Trin, and thank you, Tim. And you are right, Trin, the Local 26, their job training program is excellent. I've seen it. I've seen the work they do. It's made up of a lot of immigrants, communities of color, a lot of women. They do an outstanding job. They work hard, and that's what our city is all about, is that work ethic that Local 26 and our immigrant residents bring to this city. No one gives them anything, but they really work hard and represent our city very well. So I want to say thank you to Tim and to Trin and to the members of this panel for the incredible work you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flynn. I just had some a brief statement and some quick questions. Just in terms of and following up on Councillor Flynn's comments about the immigrant community, wanted to let folks and advocates know, and especially those from MAHA, in direct response to the requests and concerns about immigrants being intimidated by their landlords that we had discussed. I brought that directly to the mayor, and I believe today, or if he has, he may have already, or he plans to today in his press conference to address that directly publicly, and state quite firmly, in no way, shape, or form should anyone be forced to leave, be intimidated, or bullied based off of their immigration status by their landlord. And I believe he will either be putting in 311 or the Office of Immigrant Advancement's number, specifically for folks to call if they feel in any way, shape, or form frightened, or that's thrown in their face. We'll very likely work with also D&D in terms of their outreach for the rental relief program to make sure, again, that's reiterated to anyone who applies, that they should not feel intimidated, especially if they haven't paid rent, to feel that they have to go anywhere. So we're starting with the mayor, and we will continue to amplify and reverberate that message to the community. One, for landlords, watch yourselves. That's disgusting that you would ever think to do that to somebody. And two, to the tenants, you have your rights, and we are here for you. So I wanted to address that concern. Then with regards to the funding that's coming up, there are the 3 buckets that I see, and as I understand it, are really funds that we are normally moving anyway. They're just enhanced specifically for this particular emergency. So, and given in a way that you can adjust it a little faster and with a little less headache, bureaucracy in terms of, I don't know, no, I've seen the forms that Rick has to fill out, and I've been at the meetings, and so hopefully this comes with less of those strings attached. But I am curious, and at some point we'll get to the numbers for how the $10 million for the CDBG will be broken up for the rental relief versus the small business. I believe rental relief started out with 3 million, may have gotten NHT funds in this round added to it, so it's 8 million. I'm not sure. And then I don't know if anything was added to the small business. It started out with 1.5 million. Is there an estimate, Trin, on your part of how much of this 10 million will come to the small business relief fund? Certainly even $5 million would be double, triple what we got for the initial funding for small businesses. I'm really curious about that breakdown because I'm looking, and I think we all are looking, I've been looking at CPA funds and people. So this kind of thing is a relief for us, but also, helping us to understand how this is going to be generated. If Rick or Tim could walk us through, when you say applications will be made available, right? Who typically, well, you know what happens when you make applications available, right? Anybody and everybody tends to apply. So I think I understood what you meant by who is going to be applying for these applications for the funds for HOPRA and for the ESG funds. It is not an open to the public kind of application, is my understanding. I think we should clarify that. And also normally there's a time, and how is the timeline faster for those grant applications? How are we moving it faster to get that extra funding out? So that seems like a lot, but whoever wants to go ahead and lead and answer, feel free. And then we're going to turn it over to the advocates for them to ask some questions. They've been waiting patiently. So they can ask about any of the non-controversial or the new money. Okay.
I can take a stab, Councillor, to answer some of those questions. On the rent relief fund, we haven't put additional funding into it just yet. We're still in the process of working through that first round of applications, as we discussed earlier. So we had the $3 million of city funding, and that's what we're kind of still working through right now. We have the working session coming up with you, and as Tim mentioned, we want to make sure that we're talking to the nonprofit providers, that we're talking to the state and other landlords, and making sure that this is a coordinated effort, and that this isn't just all about the city solving every problem, because no amount of funding is going to do that given the breadth of the crisis. So we really want to be thoughtful about how we move forward, and that's our plan. And you're right that the 3 buckets, CDBG, HOPWA, and ESG, are, as we just discussed in the previous round, these are grants that we get every year. The CARES Act made additional funding specific to address COVID-19 response from those buckets. So they come with some of the same rules around income eligibility and eligible uses, but they granted more flexibility in terms of shifting funding around. So typically, once you kind of put a plan out there and it's approved by HUD, you would need any changes that you would want to make, you would have to do a 30-day public comment period. That's been reduced to 5 days in most cases. So that makes it a lot easier for us once we kind of establish a spending plan to shift it if necessary. Tim kind of mentioned on the CDBG side that we don't have, at this point, we can't tell you how much we're putting into rent relief for small business or workforce development or any other use. I think that's our job for in the coming days. And in, again, talking with you about the rent relief fund in the working session, figuring out what the right balance is between all of those different needs, because the needs are great and $10 million is not, not going to solve the need. So we want to be really thoughtful about that. We should also just make sure that people know that this is the first allocation of this funding. There will be more funding to come from the CARES Act based on formulas that have yet to be determined by HUD. And we don't know kind of what the timing of that funding is or the exact amounts, but as we right now, we're still in kind of a response mode, and then we'll be moving to a recovery mode, right? And so I think some of those funds as we go forward could be shifting kind of focus a little bit. I'm trying to think if did I cover everything? Tim, do you have anything to add?
There was the
I
application
just wanted
process.
Applications, yes.
Yeah, I'll cover that part. I also wanted to say that in terms of the CDBG funding, when we do kind of determine how much will go into each bucket, we would have to do a public process for that. We would have to have a substantial amendment published. We would be sending out information about that to the council and also our usual network of agencies and advocates, and have a time for comment on that package. So that would be, that will be forthcoming. In terms of the applications that were mentioned, yes, for ESG and for HOPWA, those are applications that would be for agencies to apply for who were already working either in the homelessness field or in the housing with persons of AIDS field. Now, there's some agencies that are in the homelessness field that are supported by the state, and we don't have a current relationship with them financially, but that we might be funding that we weren't funding before. So there might be some new agencies that we would be funding, but they will not be new to this area of work.
Okay, so there are smaller nonprofits. If, for example, they said we've adjusted our worker organizing to housing organizing for the first time, that agency very likely would not be part of the pipeline we're looking at. Agencies that have had to adjust their missions or change what they're doing.
Right. I mean, the ESG money is really going to be focused on homelessness, and really a lot of the costs that agencies have already come under fire for paying for, cleaning services and extra pay. And we expect that the BCEC we won't have to pay out of this funds, but there may be another kind of hotel rooms to help people socially distance and to de-densify both shelters and other congregate housing. I mean, those are all things that we think will be the priority for this ESG funding, at least in this round.
Okay. I think that was it for me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to some advocates if they could raise their hands through this application if they had any questions or comments. Or I'm going to keep scrolling through the pictures if you wanted to make yourself available and wave. I can also see you that way if you don't know how to raise your hand on the application. I see from Maha. Let's see, organizing team from, yes, from Maha. So we'll have, just keep waving your hand physically on the camera so we can unmute you. Okay. All right, you're good to go.
I thank you, Chairwoman Edwards. First, we want to really say thank you for bringing up our concerns about renters being vulnerable, particularly because of their immigration status, and that's fantastic to hear. I'm also going to tell Herson about this because you were so great with him when we brought this up, and he'll be happy to know that the mayor has gotten engaged. So fantastic on that front. Another thing I would just say is that it seems like now is a really important time for the advocacy and organizing community to be cross-training. You know, I was on a call yesterday, a national call with housing counselors, where they were talking about the first and most important housing counseling you need to do is unemployment, because so many people are eligible now who are not normally eligible. So just want to think with all of you about ways that that resources can be made available so that there are more hand-holding people, because frankly, right now, you know, yes, your lender may well be able to give you 6 months of deferred payments, but if you don't know how to do it, and you're going to need help. So just wanted to kind of flag that as something that we need to look at, because we are getting a lot of interest in that, but a lot of, you know, not knowing how or what to do. We also, and I think that also can help on some of the rental side, because if the landlord is under less pressure, it doesn't, with a lot of landlords, that doesn't matter. But with some landlords, it really would matter to relieve some pressure on the tenant, at least while they're waiting for unemployment to kick in, and thereby relieve some of the stress on the rental relief fund. So, you know, obviously we're in support of all of this. We want to make sure that the rental relief fund is really focused on those folks who are not eligible for other income supports, because in general, you know, we're the home ownership people, we're the equity people. We really don't want to see an additional dime go into landlords' pockets who will just run away with the equity from public money. The rental relief fund right now, we know is an emergency and we got to do it. But we'd really like to see, you know, even on the rental side, the acquisition opportunity program, at least you're giving it to a landlord that's committed to long-term affordability. So we'll be engaged in the working group where it's fantastic. It's been scheduled. I want to thank everybody here, both on the administration side and the council side. You guys are doing fantastic work.
Thank you. That working session is May 4th for folks who are interested, again, on the rental relief program. Were there any other questions or comments from folks? I'm just scrolling through, looking at if there's any raised hands. Any final comments from my colleagues on the City Council? Any closing remarks from the administration?
Just a very quick thank you for having this hearing at such expediency. It really helps us to be able to move forward. Yes, we do need to provide additional information on how the CDBG funds will be spent. But it means that once that we do have that plan in place, we can move to the spending part of that process much more quickly. So thank you very much for having this hearing today.
I want to thank you for making yourselves available to answer these questions. We all have the sense of urgency. On that note, the hearing on, be patient with me, docket 028-029-030, 0631, 0632, 0634, and 0635, I think I got them all, is officially closed. Have a good day.
Thank you.
That's all.